Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. The former CEO of Alberta Health Services files a lawsuit against the province for wrongful dismissal. Plus, Donald Trump rolls out plans for reciprocal tariffs, saying it will be fair to all. And as we approach the 3-year anniversary of Freedom Convoy, we speak with the organizer who could face 10 years in prison.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. American President Donald Trump has rolled out his plan to increase U.S. tariffs to match the tax rate that other countries charge on imports. Trump says he will charge a reciprocal tariff that will be fair to all, adding that, quote, no other country can complain. The move could possibly trigger a broader economic confrontation with allies and rivals alike, as a dramatic hike on tariffs could send shockwaves through the world economy. The tariffs increase would likely be paid by Americans either directly or in the form of higher prices. It comes as Canadian leaders have been making a diplomatic push to stop Trump's threatened tariffs on Canadian imports.
President Trump just announced a new round of tariffs. He describes these as reciprocal tariffs. Essentially, if there's a country that has a tax on American exports to their country, America will put an equivalent tariff on imports from their country. This could have a dramatic effect on American trading partners and really upend a lot of economic trade all over the world. You could see higher prices for consumers with these tariffs, and a change in what products are available and how much they cost for consumers, as they are already dealing with a period of inflation that President Trump has promised to stop.
With tariffs looming in the foreseeable future, many Canadians are left wondering how they will be impacted. Dr. Danny Leroy, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Lethbridge, explains it in simple terms.
In this discussion with the consequence of Trump's tariffs, it's important to remember the people involved. And the people who are directly impacted first and foremost are those individuals in the United States who wish to buy products produced in Canada, and these are the people who are paying import taxes on those goods. It's individuals who are paying taxes on these imported goods.
Catch more of my interview with economics professor Dr. Danny Leroy coming up later on in the program. Canada's territorial premiers say it's a critical time for the Arctic. They met today with representatives from Greenland and Washington, where Canadian leaders continue their diplomatic push against threatened U.S. tariffs. The leaders spoke about prospects for collaboration between Canada and the United States on resource development and security. It's become increasingly clear from President Donald Trump's repeated comments about the United States somehow absorbing Canada and Greenland that he has an eye on Arctic resources. Liberal leadership candidate Mark Carney has made his pitch to help tackle Canada's housing affordability crisis. He's vowing to incentivize prefabricated and modular home building.
We can speed up, increase speeds by 20 to 50%, reduce waste by almost 50% in the construction process, reduce emissions over the course of the production process and the lifetime of the building by 20%, and really get housing for people more rapidly, more efficiently, more cheaply, again, cost reductions of over 25%, and build true Canadian technology that not just serves Canadians here, but ultimately serves around the world.
Meanwhile, rival candidate Chrystia Freeland says she has a plan to woo back Canadian doctors and nurses practicing in the U.S. Her campaign says if the U.S. moves ahead with tariffs, she'll offer doctors $200,000 and nurses $100,000 to return home to Canada. Karina Gold, Ruby Dalla, and Frank Bilas are also in the race to become the next leader, which takes place on March the 9th. There's also an election in Ontario brewing, and the Greens are the first party to release a fully costed platform.
The Ontario Greens platform is fighting for a fair future for all of us. Our plan addresses the fairness that we need to build affordable homes and protect renters, bring fairness back to our healthcare and education systems, to protect the prime farmland that feeds us, and lower your energy bills and reduce climate pollution.
The NDP and Liberals say they will release costed platforms soon, while the Progressive Conservatives committed to releasing their plan in the coming days, though it wasn't clear if it will be costed. 3 years ago, a trucker convoy swept across Canada to meet in Ontario in a joint effort to end COVID mandates. And February 14th is the 3rd anniversary of the invocation of the Emergencies Act that shut down the Freedom Rally. Co-organizer of the trucker convoy, Chris Barber, who could still face up to 10 years in prison, gives his thoughts on what took place in Ottawa 3 years ago.
Well, the protest in Ottawa was one of the most peaceful protests in Canadian history. There was no violence. There was no level of violence. The only violence we've seen was from law enforcement acting under Justin Trudeau's, orders to break up the protest and not listen to Canadians who were trying to voice an opinion against the overreach that was happening throughout COVID.
Catch my full interview with Chris Barber, co-organizer of the Freedom Convoy, coming up after Business News. The former head of Alberta Health Services is suing the provincial government, alleging wrongful dismissal and high-level government corruption surrounding medical contracts. A statement of claim alleges that Athana Mentzalopoulos was fired last month for investigating overpriced contracts and conflicts of interest between government staff and companies being contracted. The lawsuit alleges Health Minister Adriana LaGrange tried to shut down the investigation and demanded Mentzalopoulos be fired. The allegations have not been proven in court, and LaGrange says many of them are false, while others will need to be investigated. 3 human traffickers have been arrested in what Alert, or Alberta's law enforcement response team, is calling Project Endgame. Take a look at this video produced out of Red Deer.
Project Endgame was a human trafficking investigation that started in Edmonton, but it had spanned across Canada. And the targets of the Endgame have been involved in human trafficking across Canada for upwards of a decade. Proactively targeted these individuals because we knew their involvement and we knew that the violence that they bring to this type of crime across the country, we knew that we had to do something to stop this from happening. Very significant charges that these 3 individuals are facing. The investigation showed us that these targets are very violent. They're willing to do almost anything to the victims to keep control of them, and preyed on their vulnerabilities and weaknesses. It's been over a year from start to finish, and we still aren't done yet. We still have a lot to do with the court process and with the victims in the future.
In local news, if you're in downtown Lethbridge, you may notice the presence of more police officers. Ryan DeRoque, sergeant with Lethbridge Police Service, says the downtown police unit is adding 6 officers and a sergeant. The unit provides first response to incidents and participates in proactive initiatives to address both criminal activity and social disorder.
We've seen a positive impact of some more proactive interactions with the public and targeting specific negative social disorder behaviors like open drug use, some violent events, and we've seen a significant impact on property crimes of thefts that have been stopped in the middle of like a shoplifting event from one of our local businesses, and multiple charges in relation to several theft events too. But keeping in mind, with these extra resources that we have been able to deploy downtown, we have curbed some of that behavior already, especially when it comes to open drug use. When it comes to drug use, like meth and fentanyl are our main drugs here in Lethbridge, and our officers respond to, if someone calls in that someone's openly using drugs in a doorway or on a sidewalk, we'll respond when we can. The main thing that I'm pushing with this team is we are responding to an event or doing proactive patrols. We see the behavior, we stop and address it when we can.
Is to make it downtown safer. Like, I love this downtown, like I've said multiple times, and I want people to be able to walk around and not have to look over their shoulder or feel upset about looking at something that they shouldn't have to see. Right? I mean, it's a reality in our world that we're in right now with the drug use that's going on. But if I can make those steps to make it a little bit safer for them and for the business owners to work in peace, that's what my goal is. Our transient population, our drug-using population is just as important as the regular population for us, right? If they want to get better, we are able to help them with that initiative and get them into programming.
The sergeant says the unit will also focus on combating open drug use and issues that impact downtown. Nearly 60 Bachelor of Criminal Justice students at Lethbridge Polytechnic are participating in a research project with real-life problems. This initiative helps them improve critical research skills and strengthen intentional community connections. Dr. Kristen Fantasier is an instructor with Lethbridge Polytechnic School of Justice Studies. She explains how this research project works.
And what they're trying to do is looking at a real-life problem that they potentially could solve or look into through research. Well, I think what differentiates our programs from others is that we actually have them working on a real-life issue or challenge or opportunity in the field, and having a project mentor assigned to them who is in the field and actually has that experience. They can give that insight, that guidance, and maybe even sometimes support or resources into what they're looking into. And it makes it real. It's different than sitting in a classroom or studying journal articles. The issues and the topics they're looking at are something, they're very actionable and current.
As a capstone project, this is really a great opportunity for students to engage in that critical thinking and communication skills and further developing them. Again, it really helps to tie in with our imperatives in terms of creating deliberate community connections, exceptional student experiences, and again, adapting to dynamic responsive programs. So these research projects, although they're smaller scale, to help work through those critical thinking skills, build those communication skills, connect with industry, create those experiences, they start to create that foundation for starting to move forward and to build on. So if they want to go into law school, if they want to move into master's programs, it helps to create those skill sets. Even for moving into industry as well, it's helping to create better employees moving forward in terms of the skill sets that they're getting. Because not only are they working with a project mentor from industry in collaboration with our own faculty, this is a great synergy.
Perceptions of police legitimacy based off of generations. So I put out a survey for basically anybody to do, and then looked at, categorized them into generations, and I'm looking to see basically if they believe that the police do their job correctly and do their job well.
To learn more about the Justice and Human Services Center program, Lethbridge Polytechnic will hold its winter open house on March the 15th. Former Mayor of Lethbridge, Chris Spearman, says he's releasing a letter to Premier Danielle Smith demanding clarity of the environmental effects of the proposed Grassy Mountain coal mining project. He says in the letter he's seeking clarification from statements made by Smith, Minister of Energy Brian Jean, and others based on logistical, legal, and business decisions in moving forward with the project. This comes as the Alberta Energy Regulator is allegedly days away from making a decision if Northback Holdings can move forward with metallurgical coal mining in the mountains near Crow's Nest Pass.
We've outlined 8 issues and asked for answers from the Premier on behalf of Albertans, and we want to share the answers with them. We have gone out and we have accessed the research reports from the government itself. We were surprised to find that the government's own reports actually agree with us that substantial contamination will happen with selenium and with coal-blown dust that will affect our river.
As the municipality of Crow's Nest Pass voted in favor of supporting the project, Chris Spearman said on Thursday that his petition signed by those opposed have neared 5,000 signatures. Well, Thursday marked the annual Care from the Heart Radioathon held at Chinook Regional Hospital Atrium. The Radioathon ran nearly all day on Thursday with doctors, nurses, and frontline staff getting the opportunity to tell their stories live on air. The Chinook Regional Hospital Foundation says they are aiming to raise more than $400,000 to support any immediate needs at the hospital or other nearby community health centers.
Well, this year we're back live in the atrium at the Chinook Regional Hospital for the first time in 5 years. So we are so excited to be here with all 6 of our radio stations coming together to support the Hospital Foundation to purchase equipment, special projects, and programs for the Chinook Regional Hospital and surrounding area. We just received an amazing check for $160,788 from Costco and the members in Southern Alberta who made such a difference. That donation is a matching donation, so every donation is doubled in the value.
As of airtime, they have surpassed their goal of $400,000, reaching $462, and they are accepting donations until Thursday evening. So congratulations to them. A major snowfall has disrupted travel plans, closed schools, and shuttered city services in parts of Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic provinces as the communities dug out from upwards of 20 centimeters of snow. Environment Canada says the storm wreaked havoc on the morning commute in Toronto and caused flight delays and cancellations at Toronto's Pearson International Airport. Flights were also canceled and delayed at the airports in Montreal and Quebec City. Quebec's transport agency has warned of dangerous road conditions and called on drivers to avoid non-essential travel. With more details, here is meteorologist Stephen Flisfitter.
The storm is making its way into Quebec. It's affecting pretty much all of southwestern and central Quebec, starting to touch into the Maritimes, New Brunswick as well. So it's a fairly large storm. It's going to be affecting pretty much the entirety of eastern Canada, the southern portions of eastern Canada. There are a lot of travel disruptions given the amount of snow that fell overnight. Road crews will take some time to clear out the main arteries, and even the side roads will take even longer. So take that into consideration with all your planning. If you can stay home, do so. If you cannot stay home, give yourself plenty of extra time to get to where you're going so everybody can be safe.
Wow. And speaking of snow here in southern Alberta, we could see some periods of light snow tonight and then another 2 to 4 centimeters tomorrow. Also, more frigid temperatures are on the way. I'll be back after the break with a full look at weather. Welcome back. Well, minus 21 is our daytime high tomorrow. That means bundle up because you are going to really feel it with that wind chill and that risk of frostbite, particularly in the evening when we get down to that minus 25, feeling much colder with the wind chill. Also 2 to 4 centimeters expected both tomorrow during the day and Friday night. As we get into Saturday, we're going to see a little bit more sunshine, but stay really frigid. So minus 18 for the high, minus 14 on Sunday with mainly cloudy skies. Could see more flurries happening on Monday, minus 17 for the high, minus 8 on Tuesday, which brings us back into that seasonal range. And then finally some pluses there, plus 1 on Wednesday to round out that 7-day forecast. So here we go. Averages for this time of year, 2 degrees is the average high, minus 10 the average low. 17 was our high, record high on this day in 2015, and 1936 saw the record low, which was minus 38. Sun rose this morning at 7:45, sunset this evening at 5:47. So we're just over 10 hours of daylight now. 10 hours, 2 minutes actually, so 4 minutes longer than yesterday. Not horrible on the west coast at all. Victoria sitting at 7 degrees, 5 for Vancouver, minus 20. Here's where we get really cold again, back to the prairies. Minus 20, Edmonton could see some light flurries, and 30% chance of snow tomorrow in Calgary with a high of minus 22. Extreme cold warning still in effect for the rest of the prairies, Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Minus 22 for the high tomorrow in Saskatoon, minus 23, Regina, minus 18, and Winnipeg also, of course, feeling very much colder with those wind chill values. Mix of sun and cloud for most of those cities as well. Like you heard earlier, most of that snowfall behind Our friends in Ontario, -5 for the high. In Toronto, could see a few flurries. Clear skies, though, in Ottawa, -9, -7 in Montreal. And as you heard before, most of that winter storm moving towards Quebec, so Montreal could sort of get the brunt of that tomorrow and tomorrow evening. Fredericton sitting at -7, -3 in Halifax tomorrow, -5 in Charlottetown, could see some flurries, and then St. John's seeing a bit of snow, freezing drizzle, ice pellets, a little bit of everything, plus 80 km/h winds, high of 1 degree there. So there you have it. That is your forecast. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business has released a new report that says 18% of its members are already feeling the sting of canceled or paused orders due to the ongoing trade uncertainty with the U.S. The business group says that that number grows even higher when looking at businesses that operate as exporters, up to 34%. The CFIB's chief economist says the uncertainty around tariffs is almost as damaging as the tariffs themselves. The potential for a lengthy trade war with the United States and the uncertainty it brings is weighing heavily on the Bank of Canada's Governing Council, especially as it decides whether to cut interest rates. The central bank released a summary of its deliberations on Wednesday, showing the discussions that were had ahead of the January 29th rate cut. The summary shows the Governing Council talked about what a prolonged trade war and its uncertainty could do to Canada. They considered survey data released last month that showed some businesses were already considering shifting investments to the U.S. PV Mart is warning of fake websites and social media accounts in imitating the brand as its stores close. The Canadian farm supply retailer thinks the spoof pages claim to sell non-existent goods at steep discounts so they can defraud customers and steal their information. The company says it's filed a report with RCMP about the fake sites and encourages customers to do the same if they've been swindled. PV Industries LP announced last month that it plans to close all of its stores across Canada after nearly 60 years of business. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 135 basis points to 25,698. The Dow was also up 342 points to 44,711. The S&P 500 was up 63 points to 6,115, and the Nasdaq was also up 295 points to 19,945. West Texas Intermediate oil was up 15 cents to 71.52 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was up 8 cents to $3.64 U.S. Gold was up $28 to $29.37 U.S. an ounce, and silver was down 4 cents to $32.65 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.57 per bushel, barley is at $6.58, canola is at $14.97, and corn is at $8.53 per bushel. Live cattle were up 40 cents to $199.55. Feeder cattle March contract was up $3 to $267.97, and lean hogs were down 7 cents at $89.37. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 70.50 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, American President Donald Trump has rolled out his plan to increase U.S. tariffs to match the tax rates that other countries charge on imports. Trump says he will charge a reciprocal tariff that will be fair to all, adding that, quote, no other country can complain. The move could possibly trigger a broader economic confrontation with allies and rivals alike, as a dramatic hike on tariffs could send shockwaves through the world economy. Coming up after the break, we are joined by the co-organizer of the Freedom Convoy, Chris Barber, who shares his thoughts on what took place in Ottawa 3 years ago and gives us an update on his and Tamara Leach's trial. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure and send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or our YouTube page to check out more of our stories and interviews. Well, it's hard to believe that it was 3 years ago that the Trudeau government invoked the Emergencies Act that shut down the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa and other gatherings across the country. And while some say it was the only option the feds had on the table, others thought it was an overreaching response. And it was the day the government declared war on its own people. Well, joining me today to discuss this is one of the organizers of the 2022 Freedom Convoy in Ottawa, Chris Barber. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Jeanette. It's good to be here.
Oh, great. Okay, so it is hard to believe that it's been 3 years. Does it feel that long to you?
It does. It's been a long road, to be honest with you. There's been a lot of trials and tribulations in the last 3 years, but we're still standing here. We're still working our way through the system ever since.
Yeah, okay. And then, 3 years since this Emergencies Act was invoked, and all the streets around Parliament in Ottawa were filled with law enforcement. I'm sure that's a memory you can't ever forget. And then, then all of a sudden, the whole world is watching, and it was so cold. And now the Emergencies Act, it was invoked on February 14th, I believe, which, we're almost right there. So what was your initial reaction to this when all this started happening?
I remember sitting in one of the hotel rooms with the Honorable Brian Peckford when Justin Trudeau announced the invocation of the Emergencies Act, and what a remarkable place to be for such a huge thing happening in Canada, to be sitting with one of the last living signatures of the Charter of the Canadian Charter of Human Rights, and Brian was just beside himself. He was there were so many different options on the table that we could have used at that time, and Trudeau was hell-bent on using any way to break, the Canadian citizen had the audacity to stand up to his government and his mandates.
Yeah, and many people found it to be, a very heavy-handed move from the federal government. And then I think it was just days later, I think the 18th of February, that the police showed up and armored vehicles and riot gear, and many people called it a peaceful gathering up until then, but after the police came, suddenly there's rubber bullets and flashbangs and tear gas. And where were you when that happened? What do you remember?
Well, I was arrested on the 17th of February. I was one of the first ones to be arrested, and I was in custody for that time. When I was released from custody, I was given 3 court-imposed conditions. One was to be out of the city of Ottawa within 24 hours. The other was to be out of the province of Ontario in 72 hours, and I had to go home. I had $120,000 worth of bail bond put on me. I have had conditions ever since then. I'm charged with 7 indictable offenses. We came home, and we've been working ever since, and then, still going through the court processes in Ottawa.
Yeah. Did you ever have to spend a day in jail while you were there?
I did, yeah. I spent about 26 hours in there, which was a small comparison to Tamara Leach spending, 49 days locked up in a remand center, basically just to punish her that way, knowing that was the only way they could punish her.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was a crazy time. We even saw footage circulating with a woman who got knocked down or trampled by a horse or something. I think it was an RCMP officer that was on the horse.
Toronto City Police had their horse brigade there, and the young lady's name is Candace Shiro. She's a Mohawk lady from Ontario who was trampled by one of the police horses.
Wow. And I believe it was your fellow organizer, Tom Marazzo, that said at a press conference that they brought the violence. So how accurate is that statement?
Well, the protest in Ottawa was one of the most peaceful protests in Canadian history. There was no violence. There was no level of violence. The only violence we've seen was from law enforcement acting under Justin Trudeau's, orders to break up the protest and not listen to Canadians who were trying to voice an opinion against the overreach that was happening throughout COVID.
Yeah. What's your opinion about how the government used the emergency powers in this way?
All we ever wanted was a conversation. We had enough people there that showed up on Parliament Hill, and there were so many better ways to do that. You watch Justin Trudeau, basically run as soon as the trucks rolled into Ottawa, as soon as the protesters started questioning him. And he stayed hidden throughout that whole time, and he didn't want to meet with us. And he stated that at the POEC held in November of 2022, sorry. that he wasn't willing to discuss anything with us because he didn't think that we were legitimate, or our concerns didn't need to be addressed by him and or his government. So there was always a better way than invoking the Emergencies Act. He could have dealt with it a lot more civilly and peacefully.
Yeah. Now, during that duration there in Ottawa, there was police presence throughout the whole demonstration area, and a lot of attendees were claiming that they had great rapport with police during that time. But of course, all of that changed after the police operation, dispersed, they into the crowd. They got the crowd underway. So what did you see during that time when you were there, boots on ground?
Well, one of my main jobs as an organizer with Convoy was to be a police liaison. I worked with law enforcement every single day, making sure emergency lanes were open throughout the city streets in Ottawa. We had, in case an ambulance needed to get through the city or a police officer needed to do anything emergency. And so I worked diligently with law enforcement day after day to try and make those lanes were open. We were safe. We were compliant. We've seen a lot of good law enforcement officers. They worked with us. It was a good working relationship, and we had a good rapport with 90% of them. But as the protest matured, you then seen how Trudeau headhunted different law enforcement officers from across the country to then come in and take the place of those law enforcement officers that were working with us, and we definitely seen a change in the atmosphere when that started to happen.
Yeah, I bet you did. And like you said before, all you wanted was a conversation. And I understand the initial spark that fueled the whole Freedom Convoy movement was to persuade politicians to stop the vaccine mandates, or at least have a conversation about it, right? So did any politician at any level ever offer to meet with you or any other organizers at any time?
No, we've seen a complete failure from our federal government. Just the provincial mandates started falling right away as soon as the trucks reached Ottawa. So that was a good indication that politicians were actually listening. But as far as our federal government, the Liberal government, the cabinet at that time, they wanted nothing to do with us. They didn't want to hear the concerns of Canadians. They wanted to keep pushing those mandates and that overreach as far as they could take it.
Yeah. Now, we all know that the convoy was met with both support and opposition. So how do you respond to criticism over how the truckers and a huge influx of people in the area were handled?
Well, I definitely didn't agree with the way it was all settled in the long run. But I think, the one thing that we heard from the Canadian people as we crossed, the 3,000 kilometer stretch to Ottawa was that they didn't want us to leave until we had some sort of answers, until the government listened, until these mandates and restrictions were lifted and completely gone. And so that was our mandate, was to the Canadian people that we heard from all across the country, was that we were going to stay there until the government listened. And there was a lot of people in Ottawa. There wasn't a big numbers of trucks in the downtown core, but there was a lot of people there that were just civilly protesting their charter rights as Canadians to stand and disagree with the government. And those people, they didn't have a horn in their hands. They didn't have a truck in their parked anywhere. Those people were beaten in front of Parliament Hill, and I want somebody who would eventually acknowledge the fact that wrongs were done throughout that experience, and the government has to be held accountable.
Yeah. Was there ever any evidence that came to light during the hearings that followed all of this regarding the government using this level of law enforcement?
Not necessarily. Under cross-examination from the Public Emergency Order Commission, lawyer Brendan Miller with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms had every member of Parliament, every level of government admit that the thresholds were not met to invoke the Emergencies Act, and we have that hands down proof. And Justice Rouleau obviously ruled the other way under political pressure, let's say.
And then, of course, time went on, and after the trucks were cleared in Ottawa, we did start to see some vaccine mandates begin to lift in various provinces. It took some time, but it happened in some places. So in hindsight, do you think the protest achieved its intended goal?
I honestly think it did. I think a lot of people, anyone who attended the protests in Ottawa, would have said it was the greatest time in Canadian history. It was such a peaceful and loving experience. If you were on the ground there, you've seen exactly what it was. We'll never be able to repeat it, and I don't think it can ever be redone. But it changed a lot of people's lives, and it woke a lot of people up. we have saved a lot of people from a really dark place in this country by just taking a stance, and you can see that's evident all over the world when I speak to people.
Yeah, we've since then seen smaller groups here and there try to start different convoys to Ottawa. Are you in favor of that? Are you basically one of those telling them to stay far away from that? Because look at what happened to you. What's your opinion on that?
I think we proved our point going to Ottawa. I don't think it can be recreated. I think there's a lot of people out there that felt so, like they felt so at purpose, I guess, that they want to try and recreate that feeling again. But Ottawa is not the place where we're going to be able to fix it anytime soon. It's going to have to take part in our local communities. You have to get involved in your local community, and if you get involved with politics, you work your way up through there. That's the only way that we're going to fix things. We're not in the pandemic anymore. We're not in that mentality. So yeah, I don't encourage going back to Ottawa every 2 months as a convoy idea like some people like to do. I'm back at home. I've been here for the last 3 years. I've been working, running my small business, a trucking company, and I've been busy doing that. So.
Well, like you said, you were arrested and then released in Ottawa. What's the latest now in your litigation process?
So the trial of Tamara Leach and myself is to resume in March 12th in Ottawa. In the morning, we will receive our verdict for my 7 indictable offenses, from mischief to going against a court order to intimidation of a peace officer, as well as 4 counseling charges on top of that. We're both facing 10 years in federal prison. Tamara has 6 indictable offenses. We'll receive the verdict on March 12th, and then an acquittal would be really nice to see, but when you go up against the government, it's really hard to walk away with that one. So
Oh gosh.
we will take it. The Crown in Ontario has been appealing any innocent or any acquittals on any charges throughout convoy. And they've been releasing drug dealers and drug trafficking and all that. So you can tell exactly where the priorities right now are for Ontario Crown prosecutors.
How does it make you feel knowing that you're facing 10 years in prison?
Well, I've spent the last 3 years of my life building my business and raising my son to take over the reins in the business. Obviously, I'm on a family farm. My parents are in their 70s now, so it puts a lot of extra pressure on my family here. We've got animals in the backyard, horses and dogs and cats. So at first, when we first went out for trial, I made sure I had a couple of years worth of hay stockpiled in the barn, ready to go. And it, what, we'll get through it. I've got a lot of family. We've got a lot of people supporting us along the way here. So whatever happens. There's always appeals on both sides, of course, and we'll just keep standing. That's all we can do.
Yeah. How's your family handling it?
Very well. We're a close-knit family. It's definitely taken its toll on, the home life a little bit when it comes to being gone. I think our trial started September 5th, 2023, and it lasted for just about a year. And out of that year, I spent 105 days away from home, traveling, sitting in Ottawa, waiting for other days, as well as the extra cost in just the travel expenses and the legal cost. It's been astronomical. So. But we've got a lot of good people standing behind us. The community rallies again with us all the time here. We definitely have a lot of support, and I'm very appreciative for that.
Okay. No, wow. Well, they say that history has a way of repeating itself, but what message would you have for Canadians who want to stand up for justice and use their democratic rights to influence change, but maybe don't know how to get started?
Well, there's a lot of groups all around the countryside. Social media is a good place to go for finding those network of peoples in those different communities and where you live. And that's basically what it's all happened in the last number of years. We've created networks across the country of people that like-minded people that are getting involved politically, affecting change in your local policies, in your town councils, your school divisions. That sort of thing is where it needs to start. It's just as simple as starting small and then working your way up. I know some people that are running for federal politics right now in the next election. That's basically where it stands right now. So community is everything. Ottawa hasn't really been there to help things for the last number of years. So we're just it starts locally. So.
All right. Anything else you want to add here today, Chris?
No, just appreciate all the support out there and the love over the last number of years. It's been a very humbling experience to be surrounded by so many amazing people across this country. I'm thankful.
All right. Freedom Convoy organizer Chris Barber, thanks so much for joining me today and for your time.
Thank you.
Canada continues to wrestle with how best to respond to the threat of 25% tariffs from the U.S. So exactly how do tariffs work and how will they affect our bottom line? Well, today's guest will sort some of this out for us as we're joined by Dr. Danny Leroy. He is an associate professor of economics at the University of Lethbridge. Welcome, Dr. Leroy. Great to have you with us today.
It's great to be here, Jeanette. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so this is such a timely topic. Everyone's talking tariffs these days. So why don't we start with a bit of an overall explanation, almost like a tariffs 101 course. What exactly are tariffs and how do they work practically speaking?
That's an excellent question. Tariffs are taxes, and they are taxes not on goods, but they're on people. Cigarettes don't pay taxes. Lumber doesn't pay taxes. Aluminum and steel don't pay taxes. Only people can be compelled to pay. So in this discussion with the consequence of Trump's tariffs, it's important to remember the people involved. And the people who are directly impacted first and foremost are those individuals in the United States who wish to buy products produced in Canada. And these are the people who are paying import taxes on those goods. It's individuals who are paying taxes on these imported goods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So go ahead.
And one of the consequences of these taxes being put in place is that it makes it relatively more expensive for consumers in the United States to buy products produced in Canada because they are compelled to pay this import tax.
Right. Yeah.
And a consequence of paying a higher tax and paying higher prices is that they're going to substitute, perhaps, towards things that are relatively less expensive. And that might be something that's produced in the United States. It might be something that's produced not in Canada, not in Mexico, but from somewhere else in the world. So one of the impacts on Canadians and why Canadians should be concerned about this is that to the extent that buyers in the United States substitute away from buying goods produced by Canadians, revenues for sellers in Canada will fall. And these products, Jeanette, they don't vanish, but they will find their next best market, the next best available, capable buyer. And some of those buyers might be in Canada. So, for example, if there's a decrease in the amount of aluminum and steel that is purchased by Americans, and this aluminum and steel is produced in Canada, that there'll be more available for Canadians to purchase. So one of the maybe not intended, but the consequences of this is that these goods that have already been produced will find another market and they will be sold perhaps at a lower price. In the longer term, this is very important for businesses because the revenues that they can make from selling to the buyers in the United States, these are circumscribed, and they can only use their resources in a less profitable and productive way. Now, some of these businesses might decide to produce less. They might decide to hire fewer people, generate less output, and generate smaller revenues. So the reason why these Trump tariffs are of concern to Canadians, it's not that President Trump can tax Canadians. The only people he's capable of harming are his own citizens, the importers in the United States. But it's the response of those importers that has consequences for Canadians.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Well, okay, so when a Canadian company exports a product to the U.S., who pays the tariff? It's the Americans?
It's the Americans who pay the import tax.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And it means that they're if the price in Canada, for example, is $100 US, and the buyer in the United States has to pay a 25% import tax on that, the cost to the buyer in the U.S. becomes $125.
Okay, so who gets the money in all of this?
It is collected by the revenue agents in the United States. They're the ones that they're imposing this tax, and they are the ones that collect it.
So when leaders of nations place tariffs on other countries, like Trump is doing, what are they usually?
But they're not placing tariffs on other countries. They're placing taxes on their own citizens.
Yeah, but
right?
I think. Do you think that people are confused by this?
I think there is an important misunderstanding here, because Canadians don't pay U.S. import taxes. We suffer the consequences of individuals in the United States having to pay higher taxes, but we ourselves, I don't have to send any money to President Trump.
Right.
It's the citizen in the United States who's paying these
I think
import
that's
taxes.
the confusion. So what are these countries trying to usually accomplish? Is it just to make money, or is the end goal to encourage their own citizens to buy local and to create more jobs this way?
That's one of the objectives, is to encourage more domestic production. So, for example, on aluminum and steel, the fact that imports from Canada will be buyers in the United States will be taxed 25% beginning March 12th. This makes it possible for firms who produce aluminum and steel in the United States to raise their prices a little bit, and it encourages other people to expand production and enter these industries. However, one of the consequences of that is that these resources necessary for producing aluminum and steel in the United States have to come from somewhere, right? So they'll be bid away from current lines of production into the production of aluminum and steel, where they don't have a comparative advantage in producing this. They could get it less expensive from suppliers in Quebec.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So when President Trump has said that tariffs will make America rich again, is there any truth to that?
Overall, you cannot tax yourself to prosperity. Winston Churchill very famously made a parallel to standing in a bucket and trying to lift yourself up. It just doesn't work, right? You can't tax your way to prosperity. Now, one of the consequences of these tariffs is that it redistributes some of the existing wealth from those individuals who are now paying the taxes to those who benefit from that protection. So it doesn't make America wealthier overall, but the benefits and costs are easily identifiable, and the individuals who benefit and those who must pay are also easily seen.
Yeah. Okay. So it's going to clearly hurt the United States.
It's going to hurt some of the people. It's hurting some of the people, right? We need to remember the people involved. The United States can't hurt anybody, right? It's a geopolitical region. It's individuals. Economics and tariffs and this concerns people. It's who we are. People are being taxed. People are being encouraged to substitute away from products produced by Canadians to products that are produced in the United States. And part of the aim is to expand production of aluminum and steel.
Yeah. And I was just going to mention, so when we see 25% tariffs placed on aluminum for exports from Canada, which account for what, 60% of America's imports, so won't that impact businesses and consumers in America? Like, their costs for aluminum are going to go up, and I'm guessing that they won't be able to build manufacturing plants anywhere fast enough to produce enough U.S. aluminum, right?
The longer the tariff is in place, the more damaging it becomes.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right, Jeanette, that in the short term, these buyers of aluminum and steel, it raises their cost structure. Anybody that's selling pop in cans, or they're using steel for erecting buildings. All of this is going to become more and more expensive in the United States. So it's a great example of how tariffs don't create prosperity. It raises the cost structure of anybody who's buying these imported goods from individuals in Canada.
Yeah. So what is Trump's end game here, in your opinion?
Well, I don't know. But the idea that somehow this is the source of prosperity, and that one can tax their way to affluence is a bit misplaced.
Yeah. If the tariffs were to be kept in place for an extended period of time, is it possible that some American steel producers would simply move their production to another country?
If the tariffs are in place, it's steel producers in other countries that might have the incentive to move to the United States, because the import tax gives them some protection insulates them from foreign competition. So one of the things that a tariff does, it brings industries that left the United States because they weren't competitive. Having a tariff in place brings them back, and it provides them a larger potential profit, and it encourages, I guess the term would be reshoring some of these industries. But this comes at a huge cost, and it's net counterproductive.
Mm-hmm. And at present, the Canadian dollar is weak, which makes Canada attractive for investments. But could that have a positive impact in the tariff war?
I'm not so sure what the connection would be there. Mm-hmm. In terms of somebody deciding where to invest, whether it's in Canada or in the United States, there's a litany of factors beyond the purchasing power of the currency that would influence an entrepreneur. And among them would be the regulatory framework. It's not just import taxes, but taxes generally, business taxes, carbon tax. In Canada, there's a long list of things that would cause a potential investor at least a moment of pause.
Right. How long do you think it will take for the American public to start protesting against the higher costs for consumers?
Well, it depends where the import taxes, who pays them, and the number of people who pay them, and how long the consequences are felt and how deeply they're felt. If there was an import tax put on Canadian oil and gas that's produced in Canada and exported to the United States, if it was at 25%, there would be a big reaction, because everybody's buying fuel. Energy is expensive, and Canadians are an important purveyor of oil and gas to consumers in the United States, and making those goods 25% more expensive than they currently are would impact a lot of people and cascade out just well beyond the price at the pump.
Yeah. Historically, how long do these kinds of tariff wars last, and who ends up being the winners and the losers in the end?
Well, there's no winners. In the long term, there's no winners. In the short term, we need to be very careful. You mentioned at the outset of the interview here, what should the response in Canada be? Mm-hmm. If in the United States, consumers are facing higher taxes on the goods, on products that they are importing, these people who are buying imports, if they're taxed at a higher rate, it does nothing to resolve that problem by taxing Canadians. How does taxing somebody or removing or preventing people from buying products resolve the problem?
Yeah.
Right? You know, if you take alcohol off the shelf, if you know that, or you tax some individuals in Canada who wish to buy products produced in the United States, this doesn't solve the problem. We're harming our own citizens by doing this. In fact, the appropriate response would be to recognize how damaging these import taxes are, and then do what we can to remove any impediments that we have. We should be encouraging people to to buy more, not only in Canada, but from everywhere in the world, to make it as easy as possible for the buyers and sellers to interact, to reduce the costs of transacting. Right? What makes people rich, Jeanette, is it's what they consume. Right? And if you make it more expensive to consume things, you don't make people wealthier, you make them poorer.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible that Trump is simply using the tariff threats as leverage, and perhaps the tariffs will never actually put into place?
Well, there might be something to that. That's a little beyond my professional wheelhouse.
Yeah.
But you see how one of the things that he has been able to do is that he certainly has Canadian politicians in a twist.
Yeah.
Right. And in terms of improving border security, my goodness, he's realized that objective at almost zero cost.
Yes. Yeah. It's pretty incredible.
It is. So rather than harming our own citizens by responding with creating import taxes of our own and enforcing them, right? Why don't the appropriate response might be to find ways to remove his ability to lever, right? So if we have some obligations at the border for security, maybe these obligations ought to be fulfilled. If there's import taxes in Canada that impede producers in the United States from satisfying the wants of Canadians, maybe these import taxes on Canadians should be removed. Right? Just take that what's the fulcrum point on the lever? Take it away from them. Canada's open for business.
Yeah, exactly. We are unfortunately out of time here. It's such a huge topic, lots to unpack. But Dr. Leroy, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I enjoyed it very much.
Dr. Danny Leroy is an associate professor of economics at the University of Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.